Evening and welcome to this evening's London Ballet Circle in Conversation, and an extra special hello to those of you joining us for the very first time. When it was announced on October 30th of last year that London City Ballet was being resurrected, the excitement that rippled through the ballet community was palpable. Many of you will remember the original LCB, which danced and toured from 1978 to 1996. And it was terribly sad when it had to close. But now, with tonight's guest, Christopher Marney at the helm, the good ship London City Ballet is ready to set sail once again. Many of you will know Christopher as both, a dancer and a choreographer and an artistic director at Central School of Ballet. Since leaving Central, he's had a very busy life, culminating in becoming the artistic director at LCB. And tonight we're going to catch up on what he's been up to and hear all about this exciting new venture. Leading the conversation is distinguished writer, ballet lover, and good friend to the LBC, Deborah Weiss. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being with us tonight. If you would like to ask questions of Chris, you're more than welcome to type them in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and please give your first name as well. And now let's welcome Christopher and Deborah for tonight's In Conversation.
Good evening. Welcome, Chris. Wonderful to have you here. And I'm sure you're very, very busy. So we're very grateful that you've made time to talk to us this evening.
Absolutely. It's lovely to be here and to share the news of the company and to see you again, Debs, too.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. So I'm going to start right at the beginning and how you became interested in London City Ballet and why it has been a sort of lifelong dream you're doing now.
Well, it was in 1987 actually that I started my on a small scale, my performing career. So at the Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch, which was the venue close to where I grew up in Essex, there was a rep company of actors in those days in many of those regional theatres. And I started to perform in their local pantomime in 1987 when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I managed to sort of join the repertoire company whenever they needed a child for a pantomime or a musical or a play. So I managed to sort of get my child equity card, and I got my 40 days a year off school, which was what we were allowed. And I would join the productions over a period of about 5 years that the Queen's Theatre put on. And it was such a wonderful learning curve of different departments of the theatre and different genres of work. And one of the advantages of being in that position was not only performing, but getting to see the guest companies that came to the theatre. And one of those was, of course, London City Ballet. And in 1991 was the first time I saw them. So I had been used to the theatre for 3 or 4 years. And then the ballet came, and I asked my mum if we could go to see it. My first experience really of dance. And it took my breath away. I felt so moved by the performance. I sort of couldn't really believe what these people were capable of. And I didn't want to go home at the end of it. I just absolutely fell in love with what I saw. And it was Cinderella. And I saw, I still have the program, actually. I found it when I started to think about London City Ballet quite a few years ago. I went up into the loft of my parents' house and found the actual program from the time. So I saw read all of the names, I read about where the company were performing, and it gave me a real insight into perhaps what was going to come later.
So would you say that London City Ballet was the company that inspired you to actually dance yourself? And what did you do? What steps did you take from watching them to actually doing class? Because
Mm.
it's not as if you'd started dance from the age of 2.5 or anything like that. So tell us a little bit about that introduction.
Yes, it was my introduction to dance. I I hadn't really been doing any sort of serious ballet before that. I'd been doing some forms of dance and drama and singing that went alongside the performing I was doing in the shows that were at the theatre, but ballet hadn't been on the cards at all. And of course, by then I was 11 or 12, and there was that preconception of having to start really, really young, which, not a lot of all boys do. I think that a lot of my colleagues had come to ballet later, but it really inspired me. And Harold King's vision for taking ballet out of London really was my introduction, and really was the company that we would see if we didn't travel into London. It was the company that was always on everyone's doorstep at the local theatre. And so perhaps once a year we might come in to see the Royal Ballet at Christmas or something, but all of the other times we'd go to the theatre in Hornchurch or the Thameside Theatre in Basildon or the theatre in Grays. And of course, London City Ballet were there. They were doing that touring circuit, and they were the ones who sort of provided dance for everybody who was outside of London.
So where did you actually train? Where did you get into? Um,
I was training locally in Brentwood in Essex when I started, and after seeing the company, I sort of ramped up that training and started to do some ballet classes, which I thought would sort of support my other techniques. It was never just a journey that I was on to be a ballet dancer. It was only really to strengthen all of the other things that I was doing. And so I then got a place at a musical theatre school on after school and on the weekends at Italia Conti. And I used to travel up after school, and I used to go on Saturdays and Sundays to do all sorts of dance and drama. And then really, and I think a lot of people would probably think this is so late, but at 15, I decided to audition for full-time training for after I'd finished school, and I did a whole spectrum of auditions really for musical theatre schools and ballet schools. And the school that really grabbed my attention was Central School of Ballet, because of one man who I'm sure everyone can guess who that was, Christopher Gable. And everybody knows the kind of career that Christopher had, but at that age of 15, I just thought, wow, this man encompasses all of these things that I've been interested in growing up. The acting side of his work, the narrative ballets he produced, the intention behind all of his movement in his choreographies, and being an actor on stage. And I thought, well, this is it. I found it. I found all of these years, these younger years that I'd been performing and working towards a career in theatre, but not really knowing if that was ballet, drama, or musicals. I thought, gosh, I've suddenly related to someone who runs a school for people like me.
Fantastic. Yes, I can imagine. He's had such an impact on so many dancers. So what was your early career experience? What was your first professional, apart from when you were a child? Once you'd graduated, where did you go to after that?
I had a few options of going to some smaller ballet companies outside of the UK, but I did an audition for something that was relatively new at that time, which isn't anymore, Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake. And so they were doing a big audition, and it was the first time they'd done an audition in a long while, because they had opened at Sadler's Wells and done a long run at the Piccadilly Theatre and then gone to Broadway in LA with the show. And in '99, they were coming back to cast their first UK tour and their Dominion Theatre season. And that Dominion Theatre season was billed as the last time Swan Lake would be performed in London, see it or live to regret it. And I still have the little cutting. And I did mention this to Matthew actually some years ago when we were doing a similar interview on Zoom during the pandemic. And you know, the fact that that show, I mean, is coming back again this year and has had such a long, wonderful life, is wonderful. But that was my first 6 months. And after that 6 months, I went on to do the Carman at the Old Vic when it started, the first edition of the Carman. And I spent probably a year and a half with them. And again, it felt like a very natural progression from performing in different types of things to going to Central with Christopher, where we concentrated on ballet, but the performance aspect of ballet. And so Matthew's work felt like it was a natural transition from that training.
And you've had actually a very long association with Matthew. And he has created some wonderful roles for you. I'm thinking about Count Lilac in Beauty as being very, very memorable. So tell us a little bit about the best experiences, and you must have done quite a lot of productions with him.
Mm. Yes, I went away after that first year and a half with him. I went away for a considerable amount of years to work in other companies. I worked for George Piper Dances, which was Michael Nunn and Billy Trevitt's company that then became the Ballet Boys. When they came back from Japan and formed George Piper, I worked with them for a year. And then I went to Europe and I danced in Sweden and in France for 4 years. And then after that, I came back and I'd kept the connections with Matthew and New Adventures because I missed the work and I missed being on stage every night because we would do all of those performances and tours, you know, so often. And so there was an opportunity to come back again, starting with a world tour of Swan Lake, but then going really into a lot of other pieces that he hadn't brought back for a long time. For example, Cinderella. So there was a wonderful opportunity to reinvent a role in Cinderella because it had not been done for many years. And then some wonderful creations as well. We made Dorian Gray in 2007, which I was very proud to be an original cast member for. And then obviously Sleeping Beauty too. And those pieces are so special because you feel that you have you make your own mark on the production. You know, the intricacy that goes into the character development, even before starting rehearsals, is so interesting, and I think really helps you to make a statement with a role.
Well, I would imagine that particularly if you're at the starting point where that you're not copying, but you're not stepping into somebody else's shoes, but you're actually doing it for the first time. And Matthew is working with you to do that, must be absolutely remarkable. And I can't imagine how many times it changes. And perhaps when you come back and revive the production, it's evolved further. I don't know if that's the case.
He always says that his shows never stand still. And even though you might be in something for a long period of time, a long run of a production, you're constantly working on the characters and the relationships with the people on stage. And the rehearsals don't stop. Note sessions continue even between shows sometimes, so that the shows always develop and they change and they improve as they go on these long tours.
Yeah, fantastic. So would you say that during your time as a professional dancer, you started to develop a real interest in choreography yourself? And what prompted that? Who were your mentors, so to speak?
It's interesting because I think the freedom that Matthew gives to dancers who are creating work is wonderful, because you can really input your own choreography into a framework of what he has in mind, and that did influence me, and it gave me a huge opportunity to be able to sort of hone the craft of choreography. But it's interesting to say about mentors, because I feel like mentors for choreographers is quite a new idea in a way. And I think that probably in 2005, 6, it was less talked about, and choreographers sort of came out of nowhere, or they were dancers within companies who were given opportunities. And I think that I had the space. I'm lucky to have had the space to do that. But probably not attributing to that to sort of one person who sort of guided me.
So maybe it was more inspiration that you would go and see, I don't know, McMillan or something.
Mm.
I know we'll talk a bit more about McMillan later. But having the opportunity to watch so many great choreographers is what drove you on.
Yeah, absolutely. And also having the scope in that company to work in different fields as well. So, for example, for Cinderella, I was a rehearsal director for the show. So I sort of learned how to engage a room, and how to give notes to dancers at a younger age. And building up to Sleeping Beauty, I was the associate choreographer. So it gave me a real opportunity to be involved in the creative process of putting together a big work like that. And so I think having the different scope of roles within that company has helped to teach me a lot about how to perhaps how to run a company, perhaps how to choreograph a piece, but it's definitely all fed into where I am now.
So would you ever, or have you ever been back to coach someone in a role that you created?
I haven't actually, interestingly. No, no, it would be wonderful to do that. And I know that's very common in ballet companies to do that. I think that sometimes what happens with those shows is that there's a short rehearsal process, and they want the show to be set and then develop. So it's perhaps not such a common practice, but it would be wonderful to do that. From my work with students at Central, I love to work on helping dancers to reach their ambitions.
So let's go on a little bit. That your next step after uh, getting to such a high point in your dance career, was that when you took over Central School of Ballet? I mean, that must have been slightly bizarre because you trained there and then you were coming back at the helm as artistic director of the school. What sort of challenges did that present for you?
The main challenge was starting off, really. I had been back to the school over a course of 5 or 6 years, whilst I was still dancing, creating pieces for Ballet Central, which is the touring company of the school. And so I had got to know how the school was operating, the new staff that had come in, what the sort of schedule and timetable of what the dancers were learning, how that was equally balanced with classical and contemporary work, which was wonderful for those students. And I was really keen to not necessarily stop dancing completely, but take on that role because it was coming up as artistic director of Ballet Central at the time. I was keen to take on that role, but I wanted also to make sure that I was bringing with me, yes, the things that I had learned throughout my career, but also the legacy that Christopher Gable had left. There had been such a huge turnover of staff, but luckily Carol Gable, his wife, was still a teacher there. Heidi Hall was the school's director, who was also trained by Christopher at a similar time. And so there were certain members of staff who still strongly believed in Christopher's ethos for creating a dancer who could tell a story. And that was really one of my big aims, and one of the challenges was to reinstate and bring back his ideas. But I think initially the one of the toughest things was that I remember we were doing Sleeping Beauty actually in Tokyo, and I had my last performance, and my parents came, and lots of my family came out, and I had my last performance there in Tokyo on the Friday night, and then on the Monday morning I had my feet under the desk at Central in the office, in Christopher's office, with pretty much no sort of handover experience or training, but I had a very strong and clear idea about what I wanted to deliver. And so for the first 3 or 4 months, it was that thing of discovering something new, remembering just a few months ago that you were doing something completely different each week, and finding the support around the school to really to bring me on that path.
So do you think there was a stage that you went through when you were mourning the demise of the dancing, or were you just so swept up in bringing these young students along and helping them into a professional life that you just thought, well, yeah, I haven't got time for that anymore?
I felt so enthusiastic about what I was going on to do that I almost didn't really think about having to have a time to grieve or get over not being on the stage anymore. It was not something that was replacing that feeling of dancing, because, like, it's an impossible thing to replace, isn't it? That feeling of of being free, flying, and being on stage that you can't get from anything else. But on the similar side, I felt so satisfied and fulfilled with what I was embarking on at Central that I didn't feel any sort of angst or turmoil. I was just really keen with getting on and being in this new role.
So just remind me, how many years were you artistic director there?
For 5 years, and I started for the first 3 years artistic director of Ballet Central, the touring company. And then for the final 2 years, I took on the artistic direction of the whole school, so of Central School of Ballet.
And then after that, you went to Joffrey Ballet, did you? Is that right?
I did. That's right. Yes. I went for a year as the director of the Joffrey Ballet's studio company in Chicago, which was an absolute wonderful year. I mean, it was only a year because we were coming through COVID, and my family were here and they were traveling to Chicago, and I was traveling back for long weekends, and it wasn't really a sustainable job for me in the long run, but it was a fantastic experience of a really wonderful and caring company that I landed in.
So when you came back, had you already had thoughts about recreating London City Ballet? I mean, had you been thinking about it for a very long time?
I had been thinking about it even when I was working at Central, because I sort of, equated the sort of touring I was doing with Ballet Central to what London City Ballet used to do. And I'd often meet people in some of the venues who would say, oh, they've been coming to see Ballet Central for many years, and they used to see London City Ballet in the same venue. And so it had planted that seed back then. And when I was in Chicago and I had started to think that probably that job was just going to be for the year, I then sort of put pen to paper and really began writing down ideas of what it might look like to reinvent this company based on the legacy that Harold King had created.
Right. And we're talking about legacy. This is something that runs through everything in your whole mindset is to do with, yes, doing something new, but always remembering what went before, and the history and bringing it back to people's memories, really, and into the forefront of their minds. So if you were really going to start this company up, you must have had a to-do list that was 20,000 pages long, things that you had to tick off. What was the first point of starting this?
The very first thing in my mind was that I really didn't want to disturb anyone's wonderful memory of what the company was. I didn't want anyone to feel that I was just taking it in a new direction, grabbing the name and going with it. I was really keen to speak to people who were involved at the time, to learn about the company, to hear about their histories with the company, and really to run it by them, to discuss whether they thought it was a good idea that this company came back again. Because in my eyes, it was too much of an important history to be lost. And I managed to get in touch with some of the former trustees of the company. Also Heather Knight, who was the former administrative director, who held a lot of the administrative information about the company and the length of it and when it closed and why. And I said to myself, if those people think it's a good idea and they are happy for me to proceed with this idea of bringing it back, then it feels like it's given me the okay to do.
And then the next step was talking to Alistair Spalding.
Yeah, I spoke to, I first spoke to about 5 or 6 of the regional venues that London City Ballet used to go to. So I had various programs, and actually I went onto eBay and I amazingly, you know, considering the company's nearly been closed for 30 years, amazingly, I managed to buy programs, one from every year of London City Ballet's existence. From, I mean, it started in 78, but there were real programs from around 81 when Diana became the patron. So from 81 to 96, I built this library of programs, and I went down and made an Excel spreadsheet of every venue that the company had been to in the UK mainly, but also overseas tours. And there were wonderful venues that just kept coming back up, like the Bath Theatre Royal, the Everyman in Cheltenham, the York Theatre Royal, that were really important to the history of London City Ballet, because they were venues that the company regularly toured to and had a loyal audience. And I just picked up the phone to these venues and I said, look, what is there a demand for this now? Because I don't want to do something if there's no need for it. And I said, if we came back in a different type of form, do you think there would be an audience who would want to come to see it? And they unanimously all said, yes, we're so starved of ballet, of good quality ballet, and especially a British ballet company who's going to these mid-scale venues. And so I thought, right, okay, well, maybe I'm onto something, but I need to think about London. You know, the London City Ballet needs to have a London home. We will be a touring company, but we need to make sure that we have somewhere in London that we're performing. And of course, the natural decision was to talk to Alistair, because Sadler's Wells had been a former home to the company. And so although I had known Alistair for probably 20 years from performing at Sadler's Wells with New Adventures, we'd never actually met or spoken. So we'd always passed, but I wouldn't say we knew each other at all. And I decided that I was going to try to meet him, but without telling him why I wanted to meet him. I don't know why. I think I just thought I need to sort of sit with him and explain it to him rather than write a long email about what I plan to do. And he agreed to, which I was amazed at. He said, absolutely, let's meet. And I met him really early one morning, and I said to him, well, Alistair, I'm meeting because I wanted to talk to you about my idea of reinventing London City Ballet. And he sort of sat up and his eyes went like this. And he said, you know what? I loved the company. He said he worked with them in his former role at the Horth Theatre in Crawley. He said he had many wonderful interactions with them. He knew, even though it was before his time at Sadler's Wells, he knew that they were a resident company at the Wells in the early 90s. And what he really loved was that it was something new, but based on an older legacy.
Sorry, I missed that because you froze.
Oh,
I don't know if it froze, if it froze for anyone else, but I didn't hear the end of the answer.
where did I get to?
Well, you're already sitting down and talking to Alistair, and he's thrilled and just idea, and he knew the company from the Horth, and so on and so forth. But the last little bit I didn't hear.
Oh, just that he really liked the idea that this was something that was going to be new, but based on a legacy that had come before.
Right, yes, understandable. So, did he offer to support you in any way?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was going to hopefully offer you some time at Sadler's Wells in a season, and would back you up for the relaunch.
Exactly. He was keen on programming us. At the time, we didn't know when that would be because of the forward programming of the theatre is 2 years in advance. And I sort of said, oh, well, I was really hoping for something next year because I've sort of got the funds to begin and I've got the things in place that I needed to start. And so we found a week, and that week will be this September, the 11th to the 14th, I'm pleased to say. And he has programmed us for 5 performances that week. And we held our launch there, which you were at last October. And we were able to use their wonderful foyer space, which felt the perfect place to relaunch the company because it was bringing it home. And we had a small launch of around 40 or 50 people one morning, and we announced that the company was going to return.
So at that stage, how far on were you with everything? Because I'm very conscious that you've had this period of having to do a lot of admin, and it's not as if you've been in the studio that much while this was all coming about. It was all fighting for performances and tours and whatever. So tell us a little bit about that period.
I spent a year where I came back from Chicago and I really took myself out of work to just concentrate on this. And it was it the amazing thing was the ideas were really just in my head, and I was having to talk to venues and choreographers or foundations that own choreographic rights that I was interested in. I was really having to reach out to them and just explain my idea because I didn't have the luxury of a studio full of dancers that I could bring them into and say, well, look at the wonderful things we're doing. It was just me in my kitchen at my laptop. And a lot of the time I was, sending out as much as I could and then really just waiting to see what came back. And, there would be days where I just thought, oh gosh, I've put out all the feelers and I've tried to do as much as I can. And now I just have to wait. And so it was a lengthy process, but I was really overwhelmed with people's response to the idea and the trust that they seemed to put in me to bring this back. And I think that was very much endorsed by Alistair for giving us these dates in September. And up until the launch, I was working on my own. And then luckily I was able after that to have the facilities to bring in a general manager part-time who I've been working with for a very busy period from October to now to get the company on its legs, to find dancers, to contract choreographers, to find a home, and to get everything ready for our first shows in July.
So I'm actually just going to mention a question that Susan has asked. because I think it's pertinent to mention this now rather than afterwards. She has asked if you had ever met Harold King.
Yes, I'm really so pleased to say that I met him on various occasions throughout his life. The first time I met him was in 1998 when I was in my final year at Central School of Ballet, and he was coming in to watch classes because although the company had closed in 96, he had just reopened City Ballet of London. So he had reformed, changed the title, and was very much concentrating the work on triple bills of neoclassical works rather than full lengths because he had a smaller company. The company had changed quite a lot since the closure in 96. They had new dancers. And that was the first time I met him. And then I feel that probably every 4 or 5 years, up until he passed away in 2020, we were in touch. And I met him about a project that he wanted to get off the ground even as late as 2015. And then I invited him to my first performances of Ballet Central in 2017 when I took over there. And so there had been a short relationship over a long period of time. And I had just really, felt his infectious personality and his humor and his want to get things off the ground and to give dancers opportunities to perform. And I really likened it to Christopher Gable. I thought these are two people who are really influencing British ballet, and they are giving opportunities to large amounts of people. And one other thing I did want to say, and this is amazing planning from Susan, but today is Harold King's birthday. And he was born in 1949 and he sadly passed away in 2020. But May the 13th, when Susan suggested that date, I thought, wow, that's serendipitous.
That is, and we're hoping he's having a happy heavenly birthday up there. So I wanted to ask you about the revival of, in particular, Ballade,
Mm.
Kenneth McMillan piece, and how you managed to make this happen because it hadn't been done for many, many years, and yet it's historically worth something. So tell us about that.
Mm. I had done a couple of projects with Deborah McMillan whilst I was working at Central because I was very interested in the relationship of Christopher Gable and Kenneth McMillan, but also having seen so many of Kenneth's works, I was just in awe of the storytelling. And I loved the way that he presented real people on stage, the merging of the character being as important as the steps, all of that just really resonated with me. And so I spoke to Deborah about this and I said, perhaps there's some older works of Kenneth's that we could tour as part of Ballet Central. And we started with a short 10-minute excerpt from Valley of Shadows, which he made in 1981, which only received 3 performances. It had Alessandra Ferri as its star. It was a very controversial work for its time. It was about the persecution of a Jewish family during World War II. It was based on the book of the family of the Finzi Continis. A very powerful work, 1-act ballet, an hour. And we worked with Alessandra in the studio, which was fantastic for the dancers, for the students, for us as well. And no one had touched that ballet since 81. And we found this perfect excerpt to put back together based on the notation. And we had Guy Niblett, who is one of the original cast members, come in to stage it with the notator and Alessandra coaching. And it was a breathtaking piece, but it just it spoke to me, and it sort of made me feel that there were definitely other works that we could have looked into in the McMillan repertoire. And so we did. The following year, we did an excerpt from House of Birds that he'd made much earlier. We did a quite extended excerpt of that, featuring this corps ballet of girls who are turned into birds. A little bit of a Swan Lake syndrome there, but very different. The birds, I mean, this sounds horrendous, but we came up with a brilliant design for it. But the ladies on point who were playing the birds were supposed to be transitioned half women, half bird, and they wore cages on their head. And we came up with this incredible design. I mean, it looked wonderful, and it was possible for them to dance with them. But it was an interesting excerpt to explore, and one of his very few fairy tales. I mean, Fairy's Kiss is one of them, I think, and House of Birds is another. But you know, fairy tales weren't his thing. And so it was interesting to do that the year after Valley of Shadows, which is, you know, really human. And we kept the relationship. When I went to Joffrey, I had put together a program again of British work, and one of those pas de deux that I'd asked Deborah for was from Winter Dreams. And coming back, I thought, well, I spoke to Deborah and I told her all about the ideas for London City Ballet, and she remembered the company. And I said to her, look, perhaps this could be the perfect vehicle for bringing back some of Kenneth's works that are rarely done. And she said, well, look, there are many works that are not done. And I must say that these works aren't necessarily done because they're not good works. They're just perhaps slightly problematic because of cast sizes. You know, this Ballade, which I'll talk about in a minute, is for 4 dancers. So for a big ballet company to do a one act with just 4 dancers it's sometimes tricky, you know, to sort of satisfy a bigger cast. And he has a huge catalogue of works that aren't really performed much.
So I mean, that's obviously a very, very good reason that a large company like the Royal Ballet is not going to invest in doing that. They've got so many dancers. So tell me how you went about trying to do this ballad with a number of dancers, and how well it's worked for you. And also, we should mention that it is going to be on the first program.
Yes. So I was intrigued when I read the very little there is to read about Ballade. There's no footage, filmed footage, there's no photographs. And out of the 4 dancers, there's only one surviving member of the cast, Stephen Jeffries. And there was notation, but very little about the actual piece. But a brief description about it perhaps being in a review. It was only performed once in a foreign tour by the Royal Ballet New Group in Portugal. So I'm very no one has said to me that they've seen it, and I challenge anyone to say that they had. I would love to find someone who had, but I liked the idea of it. I liked the brief storyline that I had read. And when I asked Deborah about it, she sort of sat back and said, well, I can't believe you've picked that one. Do you know what it's really about? And she won't mind me telling you all this because she has spoken about it, I think, on an interview recently. But she said that ballet is for 1 woman and 3 men. And she said, I'm the woman. I said, oh, okay. And she said, and Kenneth is the man who sits next to me at the beginning of the piece. And then the other 2 men are 2 of our friends. I said, oh, okay. So he's made that, you know, about a group of friends. She said, no, it's about our first date. And I thought, oh my goodness. So the dancers start sitting in 4 theatre chairs with their backs to the audience, looking up. And she said, what we're doing is we're watching a film, because our first date was at the Picture House in Fulham Road at the cinema. She said, and there's a wonderful, and I hope that people will come to see this, but there's a wonderful little interplay at the beginning of the ballet where she's looking over at him and he's looking back, and then there's a hand that goes around and they hold hands, and then they go into what was sort of their first date, and then the ballet becomes a little bit more abstract, but it's about friendships, and ultimately it's about them meeting and an expression of love from him to her.
That is so gorgeous. I think that's really lovely, and it makes it so very personal to McMillan, and that's really great.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit the audition,
Mm.
because from what I gather, you were rather overwhelmed with people that wanted to join the company, and I'd love to know what sort of process you went through in order to sift through that, and how many people you actually auditioned towards the end, and how you arrived at who you've got now, which looks like a wonderful company.
I was really keen to see as many people as we could and give the opportunity out there for dancers who are interested in this kind of work. That was really important to me, that I wasn't just seeing dancers who wanted a job. I wanted to see people who were interested in narrative work, who had a strong interest in ballets that haven't been revived for a long time, and being part of a process, and not just sort of being, you know, bodies in space to put work on, but for dancers who would be included in the conversation. And I knew already that we could probably have about 14 dancers for the first season. And for the works that I was bringing, that felt like a good number. There's the biggest cast piece that we're doing is for 10, which is, you know, pushing it with numbers, but most other ballets are for 4 or for 6. And so I knew I was looking for 14 dancers, and that probably out of that, I had 5 or 6 dancers that I had worked with over the years that I was going to invite to join the company. But I knew also that it was important to me to have a company of different types of dancer and different characters, of different ages and different experiences, and dancers who are at different levels of their careers. Because putting together a company from scratch, I almost had to build in, although we're not having ranks of soloist and principal with 14 dancers, it doesn't feel right. But we almost needed to build a company that had those kind of levels and ages of different dancers, so that we could satisfy the characters that we're going to portray in the works. And so I put out the audition ad, and I put all of this information in there of the kind of dancer I was looking for, a dancer that was equally at home doing contemporary work as they were classical work, which is a prerequisite now for all companies, dancers who were interested in acting and telling a story. And we received 930 applications, which I was completely overwhelmed with. I thought perhaps we'll have a couple of hundred. I mean, it was wonderful. We opened it up to the world, really. I wanted just for people to be able to apply who lived not just in the UK, but all around the world. Obviously, we can't see that many dancers, and many of them were coming from overseas as well. So we selected based on CV and footage that they had submitted, so we could see them dance. And a team of 3 of us went through every video, and we all watched each video. I made sure that we gave everyone a really fair chance of being seen. I also visited lots of the schools so I could see the dancers in their graduate years. And we probably had about 200 dancers in the audition. Kevin O'Hare really kindly gave us a studio in the Opera House for a whole weekend. You know, he understood that we were new and didn't have our own space yet. And I said, look, I want to be able to see as many as I can. And he was wonderful. He gave us that access. And we did a full day of classes on the Saturday. And we then did a recall on the Sunday for 40 dancers. And at that recall, we did another class in the morning, and then we did what I would say is probably our most classical repertoire. We taught them an excerpt from, which is Lorena Waltz, which Ashley Page choreographed in 1993 on an all-star cast that I can tell you about later. That a tutu ballet, which is very free-moving, beautifully fluid work, that will be our opening number for the show. And we taught an excerpt of that, and then we taught an excerpt of a contemporary piece that was on the other end of the scale, where the dancers were barefoot and they had to use the floor, and they had to have a small part of a creative exercise as well to see how they coped with that. And then after that, you know, we spoke to people, which I think is a bit rare sometimes. Usually you might go and do a class and then get offered a job or not. But we had I don't want to call them interviews because it was reciprocal. We were just talking with the dancers that we were interested in person and then over Zoom in the week after the audition. And we found 8 dancers from that audition, and they are coming from all over the world. We have a good amount of UK trained dancers, and then we have some other dancers coming from South Korea and from America, and 2 from Spain. And so we have a really wonderful mix of experience and trainings and styles that I think will complement the characters that we were looking to cast.
My goodness, that's just, it's epic, really. When you think about it, from 930, you have to, well, you whittled it down to 8, but you will have 14. Presumably, before you did the audition, you already had a good idea of a couple of people that you were definitely going to have. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so there were some dancers that I had worked with. There is a woman called Isadora who I worked with at the Joffrey Ballet Studio Company, who has been in the last couple of years dancing for a ballet company in America, who is coming. There is a dancer who may be known to some people on this Zoom called Alejandro Virels, who's a Cuban dancer who was a principal in English National Ballet and most recently in Berlin Staats Ballet. And he's now a freelancer, and I'm very pleased to say that he's coming. And so there were 6 dancers like that that were either on my radar or who I had worked with before and thought they're going to be perfect for this work.
Right. I'm just going to mention Fiona was asking, and I hope that answers your question, Fiona, that you've obviously employed people like Northern Ballet's principal, Joseph Taylor, and how do you see it progressing over time? I mean, are you going to have a sort of core group, or will the company change every season?
I'm going to have a core group that I hope will stay with me. That's been discussed. And then there will be a selection of dancers who perhaps come in and out for depending on the repertoire for that year. There's probably 2 dancers who are on sabbaticals from other companies. So I imagine that they would go back after the year to that company, but then we would have kept a relationship with them so that they're able to come back and be involved in future works perhaps. But I also am keen on having a guest artist each year who may not be with us for every show, but will do some performances with the company, and that will change depending on the repertoire for each year. But as you know, Alina Kojikaru is going to be our guest for the first season, which I'm beyond thrilled about. She's been just an absolute inspiration of someone I've watched throughout her career. And I asked her because I thought I know that she's just such a wonderful interpreter of Kenneth's work, and this work is for 1 woman and 3 men. It's a great showcase, I think, for a ballerina, and it's feels like a new McMillan in a way, because it's one that people haven't seen. And so I met Alina and I spoke to her about this whole idea. And again, this is another example of speaking to someone who, I admire, but could only really share my ideas with. I couldn't show her too much of what it was going to be, but she's trusted the process, and we managed to put together Ballade a little while ago. And Alina came to watch some rehearsals, and she'll be with us to learn the full piece in July.
That's amazing. Um, so I was going to ask something about programming, because you mentioned how, well, this is the case in most companies, that you have to program 3 years usually in advance. I mean, if it's a very large company, I assume that it's less for a smaller company.
Hmm.
Do you know now what you might be doing in the next season? You don't have to say what it is, but
I mean, I have strong ideas and have started those conversations about what we would want to do next year. It's tricky because this is the first year we're doing it. So, I'm intrigued to see if people will buy tickets, because that's one of the most important things for our second year, that people attend and that we're full and that our shows are well attended. It will have a big impact on year two. But of course, I'm starting to plan the repertoire for the second year. And without giving sort of names of pieces and things like this, I have started sort of speaking to, for example, the Peter Darrell Trust. We had a meeting about some of Peter's works, because it's got a wonderful catalogue of work like Kenneth that perhaps isn't done very often. There's not a lot of companies doing that work. So I met the trustees of that foundation and had a wonderful talk about what could be possible for the future. London City Ballet had a relationship with Darrell's work. They have performed his work in the past. So there's a lovely link there between the choreographer and the former company too. I'm of course interested in more of Kenneth's works. I think there's many that are waiting, like Ballade, to have their revivals. And then I'm also very interested in not a work that isn't perhaps quite as old as some of Kenneth and Peter's works, but works that we don't get to see very much in the UK. So American choreographers or choreographers that are working in America, for example. I'm a big fan of Alexei Ratmansky's choreography, and we rarely get to see his work in the UK, Ukrainian choreographer who's at New York City Ballet as a resident. So as well as bringing back older works, I'm also adamant to find works that I feel would appeal to the audience here, but works that perhaps we don't get to see very often because they're not programmed by the British companies.
right. Now I also wanted to ask you about your new rehearsal space, because that's very important. I think when we first talked about this, I said, is Sadler's Wells going to be your home? And then you revealed that there were other possibilities. So tell us a little bit about that.
Mm. It's in London, it's so difficult, isn't it, to find the appropriate space for a dance company. And I really didn't want to have to rent studios by the week and move around to different locations in London. I know from being a freelancer how hard that is to, arrive in a studio on the Monday and then be somewhere different on the Wednesday, and still have to go into the studio and give everything and run a full ballet, but not to completely feel in your skin because you're working on a different floor in a smaller space. And so I put my mind to trying to find a base, and to find an adequate space in London that is cost effective, that doesn't have a low ceiling or pillars or a wooden floor, is really, really difficult. And then if you look to central London rehearsal spaces, it's, £1,000 a day. So I started off by Googling youth centres that have dance studios, because I thought community centres are often quite free during the day before the youth clubs start after school. Many of them have dance as a big part of their output. And I found an amazing centre run by Islington Council, a stone's throw from Sadler's Wells, that was an old Victorian school that had had quite an extensive renovation, and who were already building a brand new dance studio in their car park. And I went to see it, and it was a bit of a derelict shed, but they said, well, you know, this might not suit you because it's not going to be really up and running for another year. And I said, well, that's ideal because neither are we. And we have kept a dialogue, and we moved into one of their very small spaces as an office last month. And the studio that was a derelict shed, I'm pleased to say, is now a week and a half away from completion. And it's a wonderful little gem, a hidden space around the back of this Victorian school in Islington. It has a huge ceiling height. It has skylights with natural light coming in. Will have on Wednesday a beautiful sprung harlequin floor and mirrors, and this, you know, it has provided us with a home that we can use when we are not away on tour. And for that, I am so grateful to have started this relationship with the community centre. And one of the other things that is so special about it is that we're really centering ourselves around young people in Islington, and I hope giving exposure to some of those young people who haven't witnessed dance before, who will then be in the same building as us.
I think it's going to be amazing, and it's sort of it's serendipitous that this all happened. Now, I also want to ask you about touring, because you've already had some dates in the diary, but I think you've had a big tour booked in China. Is that right?
Mm.
So how many dates, and where are you going, and how exciting is that?
Yeah, I mean, we had to, like I said, I was really keen to revisit venues that the former company had been to and had made an impression on. And so we could only really start small. I couldn't do 20 venues, but we could do 6 in the UK. And we've tried to spread them out. We're going to the north, to York. We're opening in Bath on the 17th of July for 6 shows. We're going to Cambridge Arts Theatre and the Cheltenham Everyman and the Windsor Theatre Royal, as well as Sadler's Wells from September the 11th. But then I was really keen, obviously, to get the word out that London City Ballet was international, like it used to be. And amazingly, I was put in touch with a company in China, who promote dance, who have been very used to bringing Scottish ballet and Northern ballet before the pandemic. And I had a phone call with the man that runs that agency, and he bought London City Ballet over there in the 90s, and it's the same man. And his name is Young, and I'm not sure how young he is. I've never met him, but he was around in the 80s and the 90s when he bought London City Ballet. So it was an amazing conversation, and he was so keen to try to bring the company. And what has transpired is a 3-week 8-city tour with 13 performances, stopping in Shanghai and Beijing and Tianjin and you name it. We're going all over China. And it will be, yeah, I'm amazed that it will really be part of our first tour, because I was expecting this to perhaps be a little further down the line. But as well as China, we have quite an exciting announcement next week. And I can't say where, but I think it's probably quite easy to guess. But we will be ending our first tour in New York.
Mind blowing. That is so fantastic. What a coincidence about this person in China. Um, it just shows. I have to say, I don't know if anybody else is feeling this. I am absolutely astounded at how much you have done in a relatively short space of time in terms of reaching out all over the world and bringing this to fruition. And I cannot see that, anything can stop it from being a success, because you've got all the elements, you've thought out everything that goes towards making a touring company. But I do have another question. Um, so I'm thinking about new works, because I know that you're very focused on legacy and reviving things that people will be keen to see, even though they're very old. But where's the new going to come in this? Because professional dancers now are on a diet of new stuff. So how are you going to go with that?
I think I had in my mind in the past, I thought, well, gosh, it's not very popular, is it? It's very popular to do new work all the time. And I thought, gosh, is this not going to go down very well? That's not my main focus. And I think that there is definitely an audience who want to see, as you said, these older works brought back. But new work is on my agenda. It's not top of my priority list, but I do want to make sure that each year we are doing one new work. And I think that's important because London City Ballet needs to have it needs to have its own catalogue of work. It needs to have its own stamp and identity. And new work does that for a company. I think when I can start to form a relationship with a choreographer that I feel is in tune with the company, which will take a while because we're new, but I think it's an important investment for the future, to have our own book of work. And for this year, I asked Arielle Smith because I really love her energy. And of course, I like her work, but something else that I admire about her is how she works with the dancers in the studio. She creates a hugely positive atmosphere where classical dancers who are doing a contemporary style can actually, can embody it and can feel at home. And Debs, that's everything. I mean, having a positive creative process can make or break a piece, I think. And I know what she does in the studio, and it's just terrific.
Yeah, I wonder if you can sort of pinpoint exactly how it is different. Because from what you're saying, I get the feeling that she's not remotely intimidating. I know she's very young, and that sort of thing. But I know, and I also know it's very different these days in comparison to when I was dancing. But I marvel at what classically trained dancers can do in a contemporary situation. So Ariel is very good at getting that from them. But what is it? Does she gives them confidence, but there must be other elements. I've never seen her work in a studio.
It's really hard for classical dancers just to be shown something that's a completely different style and for them to learn it and do it. They have to be sort of brought into the process, I think, to get the best out of them. And what she does is she even teaches a version of her kind of warm-up class to get people involved in the way that she moves. And nothing's wrong with her. What I mean is that you can't do anything wrong, that you're contributing all the time and it's good, that you're starting to warm up within her style of movement, but with your own vocabulary. And ultimately that becomes the steps that you might see in the piece, so that she might reframe something that a dancer has made or elongate it and add to it so that they're already feeling at a place of comfort before they even really start to map out what the steps are going to be.
Oh, fantastic. And do you think rehearsal time is going to be enough, because I know how difficult it is creating from scratch. And, you know, I know from Akram Khan and people like that, how they need to get the bodies to move in a certain way, and it does take time. So, factor, I guess, in your planning.
Yes, so she's going to spend some days with the company before she actually even starts her creation period, so that they get to know her, and it helps her to be able to cast the piece with the individuals that she's got. So there's a time with her, and then there's a bit of breathing space, and then she's coming back to make the creation.
Brilliant. I'm actually going to ask a few questions now because yeah, I think they're piling up here. So I'm just going to, well, a few comments. Jane says, I loved Chris's performance as Count Lilac. You're not alone, Jane. And Fiona says that she was at the Swan Lake run at the Dominion, so we'll have seen you there. Jane asks, what about another children's ballet? Dogs Don't Do Ballet has never been surpassed.
Oh. Yes, I that was a wonderful experience, and that's where I sort of worked with Chira Robinson for one of the first times. Who's going to dance with the company, and at Ballet Black, I was commissioned to make Dogs Don't Do Ballet, which was a very successful children's book by Anna Kemp, and it felt like that would translate well to the stage, and we made a 50-minute children's ballet of it, which was wonderful. It's about a dog who followed a little girl to ballet class every day, but wasn't allowed to join in because she was a dog, and would watch and learn all the steps from the side. And one day, when the lead ballerina got injured, the dog jumped up on stage and finished the performance.
Oh, gorgeous.
It'd be lovely to do it again.
But I guess you probably don't have the time at the moment to consider doing a children's ballet, another children's ballet.
I mean, one step at a time, isn't it? Really, it will be lovely to do that. And I have a little boy who's 5 years old, and that will be a wonderful introduction for him to see the ballet as well. But no, it's something I'd love to do, and hopefully can in the future.
So Susan has asked, can you say a little more about your role at Joffrey, and how did that compare to being the artistic director of Ballet Central?
At Joffrey, the studio company is only 10 dancers. So from the 40 who were at Central to the 10 at Joffrey, that was already a big difference. But these dancers at Joffrey are already graduates of dance schools around the world. So it's really a pre-professional year when they are spending half of the day with me, and we're training in the mornings and creating our own program of work to perform. And then later in the afternoons, they are rehearsing with the Joffrey Ballet, and then sometimes performing in the evening. So it's a very intense year, but more geared towards dancers who have already graduated from schools.
Right. So another comment. Jane says she's delighted to see Chris again. I remember his last appearance at the Circle 10 years ago. Fiona is asking, can you say something about how you are financed?
Yes, of course. I'm happy to talk about it. I had explained this idea, like I had to venues and choreographers and dancers, to some contacts who I thought might be interested in seeing these works come back to life. And I realized that there is an audience who are keen to see these works remounted. And so the conversation started around having their financial support split between 3 or 4 people for the first few years of our existence. So I wanted to make sure that we had the means to be able to sort of stand on our own 2 feet while we were really working on the vision and trying to get the company up and running. So that support has been wonderful from these individuals. So the answer really is through private sponsorship. But I, of course, am always looking at ways in which we can raise funds, that we can make revenue from doing classes or workshops or performances. And also one thing that if anyone is able or keen to help, that is a really growing initiative, is the Friends of London City Ballet. So we started that, and for as little as £5 a month, people have been signing up to the membership and will receive newsletters. And actually on the 20th of June, we're having an event for the Friends of London City Ballet at the studio. So we are, we're finding our support through generous individuals of all different sorts of levels, and still, and still searching for that.
Thank you. So there is another question here from Alison saying, thanks for a super interview. Could you ask Chris if the company will be performing to recorded music or live?
Yes, so as much as possible, I'm trying to look at works that we can perform to live music. Now, obviously, because we're a new initiative, we can't start an orchestra at the same time. Some performances I hope will be. We're having conversations with some really exciting young orchestras that would match our sort of youth of the company as well. And so where we can, we will work with live music. But again, that will be like the children's ballet. It will be steps that we need to take as we grow. But it's something that it is important to me, and where we can utilize that and work alongside live music, it will be really important for me to do so.
That's really great to hear, because I think it does make a difference. It makes a difference not only for the audience, but for the dancers as well, to have that collaboration. I think it's wonderful. Well, I have actually got to the end of the questions on the feed. So I don't know whether Susan would like to come back into the conversation. Here she is. I think she's about to appear.
Yes. Am I here?
If you have anything else that you want to add, I think you wanted to mention something about something for the circle.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to discuss.
Can you talk a little bit about the upcoming visit to the studio in Islington, and what what the members might get to see?
Yes, so on July the 11th, Susan and I have organised an event for the members of the London Ballet Circle to come to see our home for the first time, to come and be invited into the studio. What I thought we would do for those of you that could make it is meet at the studios at 10:30, so that we can bring you in and you can see the centre of class, so the last 45 minutes of class. And then we can have a short break where I introduce you to the dancers, and we have a cup of coffee and get to know you. And then come back in for the last sort of hour of rehearsal, so you can see some of the works that we've been doing in the studio. And we chose July the 11th because it's right at the end of our rehearsal period. It's the week before we open in Bath on July the 17th. And so it felt like the perfect time to be able to show some of these works in an informal setting, and get to know you, well, some of you for the first time, some of you who I've met many times before.
Oh, I think it's going to be great, and I can assure you, you will have a very enthusiastic audience. So yes, thank you. And just for this evening's conversation, it's been absolutely delightful. Deborah, thank you so much for asking all the questions that we thought of and things we hadn't thought of. Christopher, your career has been so incredibly varied, and that CV you have, plus your very positive personality, your enthusiasm, your passion, they can only mean that London City Ballet is going to be a big success. And I'm sure many of us watching tonight have already bought tickets for at least one of the upcoming performances. And those who haven't better hurry up, because they might be too late if they hesitate. But I'm sure if you want to book, you can do so through the London City Ballet website and get your tickets before they're all gone. And we can't wait for the visit in July. It's going to be a real honor for us to be one of the first to see what you've come up with. So thank you. As well as the London City Ballet visit, there's a lot going on in the LCB calendar. I'm getting very confused between LBC and LCB, so forgive me. But we do have 2 visits coming up to the English National Ballet School. One to watch the choreography, which the London Ballet Circle Choreographic Award is helping to support, and the other to watch the students in rehearsal for their end of year performance. And both of these are going to be great visits. So that's one thing. Also, if you fancy a Sunday evening in Birmingham, the Grad Pro finals are taking place this coming Sunday at Elmhurst, and LBC members do have the chance to book tickets at a discounted rate. So that should be fun. And finally, please come out to the Royal Ballet School on the 29th of May, when Sarasota Ballet's Margaret Barbieri and Ian Webb will be our in-person guests. We're going to show a film, and there will be a discussion led by Jane Pritchard. So it should be a really special night. And you can find the details on how to book for all of these on the LBC website, tlbc.org.uk. So thank you once again, Christopher and Deborah. Really been a special night. You guys are obviously good friends, and it's just been a very relaxed and happy conversation. Christopher, we wish you and the company, London City Ballet, a brilliant debut and a very long and happy future. And thank you to all of you who tuned in tonight. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much, and good night.